Hey there, and welcome to the 9th episode of the Xamarin Code Hour. This one is going to be a little bit different, a little bit special. I've got a couple things going on. First of all, I am now streaming live to Twitter in addition to YouTube, so that's new and exciting. Also, I am full screen. I've filtered out all the background, and that's going to be an interesting thing. It will be interesting to see if it works. You're going to may see some weird behavior. It didn't happen. Now you think I'm crazy, but I will actually disappear if I do that. All right, whatever. Anyway, sometimes I may just disappear and my hands are going to go all crazy. We'll just see if this works. So, but the big thing is, this is a new format for tonight's episode only. Normally I do live coding, and tonight I am going to be doing a presentation, a repeat of a presentation that I did last Saturday to a local code camp here in Virginia, United States, and I am going to customize it a little bit to a YouTube audience. So I hope you enjoy. Please feel free, as usual, to, I see I've got a couple people signed on, so please feel free to interact, ask questions, and share any thoughts that you may have. So this last thing is, this will be largely a presentation, so it's going to be less coding, but I'll definitely get into some coding and show you some real stuff. Okay, so here I am in my new format. All right, Xamarin versus Ionic, a cross-platform mobile shootout. First of all, an introduction, if this works, which it's not doing. Nothing like live. Oh, there we go. Okay, so my regular audience already know a little bit about who I am, but thought I'd keep this in. So my name is Lee Richardson, and I've been doing software development in the Washington, D.C. area now for almost 20 years. I have been doing Xamarin development for maybe 4 years, before it was free anyway, before Microsoft acquired it. And I've been doing mobile development for about 6 years, I think. So I've done a blog post. I have a blog post. I blog at leerichardson.com, and this was one of my blog posts. This was Xamarin versus Ionic, a cross-platform mobile shootout, same as the title of today. And I published this about 2 years ago, and 2 years ago it was a big hit. It was picked up by Code Project and got some good marks. And the reason that I did it is because I had this great opportunity. I worked on a Xamarin Forms project, and then I worked on an Ionic project. I worked on these two projects back to back, and I had the opportunity to compare feature for feature what I thought of the different frameworks. So 2 years ago is a long time, of course, in the development world, and so this presentation here has been updated for 2017, and you'll see that in the slides as we continue. So this is my show. I do this every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, UTC -5, which is actually going to be changing. I think next episode that'll be UTC -4 as we go into daylight savings time. Anyway, you are watching the show, so you already know a little bit about this. All right. I advertise this about every episode, so if you aren't aware, this is a siren of shame. This is my hobby, and this is a piece of software and a piece of hardware, and the software is free, open source on sirenofshame.com, and it is a piece of software that hooks into your continuous integration server, and it tracks when the build fails and when the build succeeds, and it'll give you notifications. But it's a lot cooler than that, because it also has reputation, achievement, stats. So for example, when somebody fixes somebody else's broken build, for example, you get an achievement for that, and you get reputation. Every time you break the build, you lose reputation. Every time you pass the build, you gain reputation, and you sort of end up with a leaderboard. And it turns out to be a kind of a fun way to motivate people. And I've actually seen this on projects where people are competing for these like CSB points, consecutive successful builds. Oh, well, that's a thing too. But the FSB points, the fixed somebody else's build points. And so on a traditional team, when continuous integration server breaks, you have one person that breaks it, and everybody else is like, not it, right? Right? Does this sound familiar? And so, but when you've got the software running, people actually compete to try to get those points, and the benefit is to the entire team because the build stays broken less often. So that's a really cool piece of the software that's free, and then I make a little bit of money by selling these USB sirens, small ones, big ones, and there is this they look roughly like this, and when the build breaks, there's this great effect here. And as you'll see, when I screw up at some point during this presentation, there was a sound associated with it. It's a bit like wah, wah, wah. Okay, so we'll wait for that to happen. That is Siren of Shame. That is one of my hobbies. Oh, here we go. And tonight only something else I'm trying is I've got my company shirt on because my boss is watching, and because I also work for a fantastic company. This is my day job. I work for Inferno Red. They are 100% work from home. So if you're watching this in someplace other than Washington, D.C., they are still a great company, and I think it's interesting to consider them. They do mobile. They actually allow me, for my day job, to write mobile code. Well, it's just really nice. And then they pay me for it. Wow! So that's really cool. Okay, that is Inferno Red. Now, let's get into the meat of the presentation. So first of all, what problem are we trying to solve? Imagine this scenario. Your boss calls you into her office, and she says, dude, because, you know, that's how most bosses refer to their subordinates, right? Dude, we've got this problem, and I have 2 months, and I need you to get this application done in 2 months. Can you do it? So, what do you say to that, right? How about, what's the scope? What platforms are we going to target? Those are all questions you probably want to ask before you can figure out whether you can meet this deadline or not. And it'd be really tempting to say, we've got web experience, we're just going to build the website only and skip the mobile, right? The problem with that is, throwing a little stats at you, this was a recent stat that was picked up from TechCrunch, and that was over the past 2 years, the use of mobile apps has doubled, and by 2021, the global revenue is supposed to like quadruple or whatever. So it's a big growth area, but this isn't just people on mobile apps. What we're talking about is people in apps, not people in apps hitting websites, but people in apps on mobile devices. And so it's going to be harder and harder to ignore the need to build apps. You can get by building websites, but it's a big deal. Apps are a big deal. And so I think in most scenarios when your boss calls you in and she asks you this question, I think building a mobile app is awfully important. Okay, so first scenario, it makes a lot of sense probably to just go native, right? Why not just build this all in Kotlin, Java, if you're on Android, in Objective-C or Swift, you're on iOS, and maybe you're targeting Windows tablets too, in which case you need a whole other set of languages. You need to know C# and F#, C# or F# or C++ or Visual Basic, right? The benefits are big. You're really close to the metal. That means you get the best performance. That means you don't have to worry about any leaky abstractions sitting on top of your framework and breaking, because the higher you are away from the metal, the more likely things are to go wrong, right? So that's really compelling. You also get full API support immediately, and that's potentially beneficial. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But the problems, perhaps, obviously, are that it's going to be more expensive. It's hard to find that developer that knows Android and Objective-C and C# and web skills, potentially too. So it's more expensive because you've got multiple teams. Usually, you've got a team doing your Android and a team doing your iOS. That's building up front, but there's also your CTO is going to care about the maintenance aspect of your app as well. So over time, somebody's going to have to pay to keep this thing up to date, and that is going to be more expensive if you've got multiple apps. They can also get out of sync. You got this problem of one is invariably going to get a little bit further ahead, and that can be frustrating for users. That can be a bad experience for your users. So that's feature disparity. So, okay, you're sold. You're ready to go cross-platform. The benefits are huge. You get to share code. You have fewer teams, only one team generally, so that's less cost. And you, consolidate. You can consolidate your dev teams, and you can decrease your maintenance. Oh yeah, there we go. And you can decrease your maintenance costs. Okay, so that's the problem. Let's talk about some possible solutions. I sold this up front as being a Xamarin versus Ionic, but the world is a little more complicated than that because React Native is a very big framework too. Unfortunately, I don't have personal experience working with React Native, and so I can't go into the level of depth that I would prefer, which is why I didn't sell it at the outset. But I am going to go ahead and compare it. I'm going to show at least some benefits of it. And I also have to point out the difference between classic Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. So there are actually four, this is backwards, this is very weird. There are four solutions I'm going to compare. Let's talk about classic Xamarin. So I've got some architecture diagrams here. And man, I'm going to have to make myself disappear occasionally. There you go, shared code. Aha, there we go. So classic Xamarin, typically in this world, you have at the bottom tier, you have all this shared code which is written in C#. Sitting on top of that, you have the Mono framework if you're deploying this to iOS or Android, and you have the .NET framework if you're deploying this to Windows. So there's a framework level. One of the things that means is that your packages, when you deploy them out to the App Store, are going to be larger because there is this shared code, this framework, which you're shipping along with each and in every single IPA for iPhone, for iOS, or APK if you're shipping it out to Android. It gives you things like garbage collection and the .NET framework, a whole bunch of code for free, but it does make the packages larger. So that's a thing to at least be aware of. Then your business logic, I can't make it go up there. Your business logic up there is going to sit in a shared, generally, I don't want to go into too much detail, a portable class library or shared, or a .NET standard library. And there's a shared element where all your shared code goes. But then here's the big thing about classic Xamarin, and that is you have 3 or 2 completely separate user interfaces that you're building. If you're on Android, you're building this out with AXML files. If you're on iOS, you're building this out with storyboards, maybe, zibs, or maybe you're just doing it all in code, which is how I prefer if I'm doing classic Xamarin. And if you've been watching all the episodes up to date, this is the framework that I have been showing. This is classic Xamarin, and you'll see, you've been seeing the building out of custom UIs. So it's a nice framework, but some of you may be saying, gosh, Lee, that's a lot of work that I have to go to repeat that user interface. And so that's where, and rebuild it each time. And so that is where that is where okay, that was harder than it should have been. That is where Xamarin Forms come in. So you can see over here on the left, there is what framework I just showed you, and over on the right you can compare what Xamarin Forms looks like, and that is you have just these thin little, at the very top, bootstrappers, and maybe a little bit of custom code in the platform specific, but then you've got your shared UI code that's written in XAML, the markup language that'll be really familiar to you if you're a Windows developer or you ever did Silverlight. Yes, that word, that dead technology. Or if you ever built for Windows Phone. Ooh, another dead technology. But the language is good. These didn't die because XAML was terrible. XAML is a pretty good markup language, and it's actually going to be very similar to, and I'll show it in a little bit here, but it's going to be very similar to your Android XML files once you start seeing it. It's just slightly different wording, but it's actually very similar. Man. There we go. All right, we got this. The Ionic, by comparison, is what's known as a hybrid app. A hybrid app means that you're using an app that looks and feels like you've got something that is a native app. I mean, you're installing it on an app store, and so you click, get your phone, and you click it, and it looks up, it looks like an app. But the thing is, it's actually a browser. You've got a browser in there, and inside of your browser, you have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And all of that is packaged together by this technology called Cordova, which used to be called PhoneGap back in the day before Apache bought them. So they had been PhoneGap, they were free and open source, then Apache bought them. They made the PhoneGap project be PhoneGap, they made it closed source. They started selling it. I don't think anyone actually uses it, but I probably shouldn't say that here since I'm being recorded. But no one I know uses it. But then they took what used to be PhoneGap and open sourced that. They left that being open source for the community, which was very generous of them. And they then allowed that to be forked. So they've got a fork. Anyway, most people use Cordova these days. That's why you're going to hear Cordova far more than PhoneGap. Ionic sits on top of that. It allows, and so back in the day, people like Untapped. Have you ever used that app called Untapped? That is a beer tracking app. And the beer tracking app was originally, it's been around for a long time, and it was originally just packaged with Cordova and PhoneGap. So you can build your apps just on Cordova and PhoneGap, but the problem is the user interface looks just like a web page. It's not styled. It doesn't feel like Android. It doesn't feel like iOS, and like not at all. So that was the problem. That's when Ionic, they stepped in as basically allowing you to write Angular JS apps. So first of all, you get to use Angular, which is nice. And second of all, then they style it all, and they've got all these custom CSS files, at least in Ionic 2, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. They have custom CSS files for each platform, and those custom CSS files then render the buttons and the text boxes and all of that, and they render them natively and allow you to make it look like it's fully native. Okay, there we go. And the other thing Cordova does, I told you it gave you the ability to package everything, but it also gives you, hello? Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm still here. Thought my mic went out. But it also gives you access to APIs on the device, including the media, the network, push notifications, camera, compass, I don't know, people use Compass app, I guess so. Accelerometer, so stuff like that. So that's another thing Cordova is getting you, and Ionic sits on top of both of those. Okay, let's talk React Native. React Native is a technology that is similar to Ionic, except for the fact that there's no Cordova in there at all, and it has application logic. Yeah, it has application logic, and then it has a UI tier, which is all still in JavaScript. So it's running in a browser like a hybrid app. But here's the crazy thing that they do. They allow you to write code, which is, I don't know if you ever used React Native. If you ever used React, it's kind of this weird mix of JavaScript and HTML where you've got like a squiggle, bracket and an end squiggle bracket, and then you've got angle brackets inside of it. And the angle brackets read a lot like native controls because they are kind of like native controls. It's closer to Xamarin Forms in that everything gets rendered, the UI part of it gets rendered down to native, but it's not like Xamarin Forms, and the application logic is still JavaScript. And so it's this sort of weird hybrid between Xamarin Forms and Ionic. But one thing I want to point out here is check out the front end column right there. The front end, the web column. This is important because with React Native, it is definitely not possible to share your user interface between iOS and Android and the web. All right, let's take a look at that previous slide here. In this one, I didn't include the web there, but theoretically, you could share out your HTML, CSS, UI with the web as well. And so this is a big differentiator between React Native and Ionic. Now, I tried to do this back when I worked on my project, or at least considered the possibility, and it was totally not doable. But on podcasts, I listened to a couple podcasts specific to React Native, and specific to Ionic, and they say it is possible, and they say there are people who have done it, so it is possible. I don't know anyone who's done it, but that's just an interesting differentiator there and something to be aware of. So, some feedback I got last time I gave this presentation was that this slide was really boring. I personally find this really interesting. I just think it's interesting to see the history of everything, and that the original iPhone came out in 2007, and the thing that's been around the longest is PhoneGap, which was released 2 years later, and that then there's this Accelerator Titanium, which has been a big framework today. People don't use it as much today that I'm aware of. At least people don't talk about it as much in my circles. And then Xamarin 2 was released. Prior to that, Xamarin was mono. It was exclusively mono, and it was primarily for running .NET on like Linux and the Mac. But then when Xamarin 2 came out, they were about making money at that point. They started selling their product, and they were making it for Android and iOS development. It was a big deal. A year later, they came out with the Xamarin Forms technology I started telling you about. Then React Native came out about a year after that, and shortly thereafter, Ionic came out. So Ionic is actually the youngest framework of the group, and it's iterating fast because Ionic 2 was just released earlier this year. So that is a brief history, and I think it's just interesting to look at the web trends over there. The web trends show that Xamarin has had a consecutive lead. People have a lot of interest in it, and you can see that bump that happened right in the 2016 era, and that was right when Microsoft bought the Xamarin and made it free, and there was a lot of interest. That was like, wow, people were, well, what is this technology? This seems really cool. So that is, oh, and just take a look at that jump. That React Native is really making a sharp increase and in interest, and I think that kind of backs up with what I hear people talking about. It seems like React Native is very popular technology right now. I should probably mention some key customers. I'm going to make myself disappear so you can see them a little bit better. Key customers, React Native. If you've used Airbnb, that was them. If you used Slack, right? Like, if you use Slack, who here is a developer that's not used Slack? Slack was written in Xamarin, apparently. And I mentioned Untapped before. Untapped was written in Ionic. So if you want to take a look at some of these apps and just sort of compare the look and feel, it might be worth doing. Okay, and this again. Oh boy. Here we go. All right, let's start taking a look at some of the details of these different solutions. So I'm going to compare them in terms of API support, developer experience, user interface, user experience, maintainability, performance. I gotta tell you about code push, so stay tuned for that. That's really cool. And I'll throw in some Etsy things at the end. This is just a little bit of a story here that I think it's worth telling, and that is that 3 weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, iOS 11 was released, and iOS 11 was a big deal. Like I guess every Apple event, they're like, we got all this new crazy stuff, and some of the big things they released as part of the iOS 11 operating system was a new API for ARKit for augmented reality, CoreML machine learning, and a vision framework, and they had a whole bunch of new draggy droppy stuff for iPad. So what's interesting, I think, about this point is how quickly everybody else adopted. Xamarin really, and I put in the top left of each of these slides up the Xamarin++. This is who wins this category, and the reason is Xamarin takes, a great pride in giving same-day support when new APIs come out. In fact, on September 13, about a week before, Xamarin released a preview build of all of the features that were going to come out so that you could test them all out before, so that on day one you could have your app in the App Store taking advantage of these features. Why does that matter? Could be because if you get your app first to market in an AR, in an augmented reality category, you can make more money, right? But more specifically, you could be featured by Apple or Android too. You could be, for them, I only show one example here, but you could be featured in the App Store, and that could be beaucoup publicity and could translate into a lot of money for you. So if this is a category that matters to you, especially if you're an independent developer, API support may just be the only thing you care about, and Xamarin clearly wins, and you don't even need to look at anything else. Incidentally, Cordova did pick up these features about a week later. They picked up the iOS 11 support, and then about 4 days later, Ionic released the UI aspects, I guess the draggy droppy bits for the iPhone X support, and incidentally they also support Angular 4.4.3 now. So remember, Ionic, well, I guess it's Ionic 3 supports Angular 4. I don't know, all this version gets kind of confusing because didn't Angular like skip from 2 to 4, and now Ionic didn't skip, so I don't know, whatever. Anyway, that is the story about API experience. Let's talk about developer experience though. And you're going to see here, I should make myself disappear because I have, oh no, that's just the licensing. Okay, but I'm going to explain to you why I think that Ionic wins for the developer experience. And to do that, we've got to switch to some real code. And to do that, I have to exit out of this like that. Okay, there we go. Now, I am going to show this all to you in Visual Studio, but that doesn't mean you have to be. That's just because I like Visual Studio IDE a lot, and so you can do this just as easily with Visual Studio Code or Atom, or whatever your favorite IDE is on a Mac, on a command line. All of this is just as doable. If you know already, there's a Visual Studio for Mac for Xamarin, and you just do everything on the command line using Taco, which is such a weird acronym, but Ionic has this set of command line tools which are called Taco tools for Cordova Ionic. Whatever, Taco. I can remember the acronym. So what I'm going to try to do, some feedback I got last time I gave a presentation was, it'd be really cool if you always showed the Xamarin stuff on one side and the Ionic stuff on the other, so you could really get a good shootout and you go pow, 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 pow. That's what I'm going to try to do here. I know you guys are laughing at me. That's all right. I'm used to it. All right, we got calculator view model. So this is the app that I have been building up to date over the course of the last 8 episodes. So those of you that have been tuning in will recognize this. It'll be familiar to you, and I just will show you what it looks like when we build this on, which we build it on iOS. Let's build it on Android. Oh boy, I did not start up my emulator. All right, well, I will. I do this. I always run this as administrator, which seems completely overkill to run Genymotion as an administrator, but I've just found fewer bugs when you do it this way. So let's do a Nexus 5x API 25. While we're doing that, I am going to switch over to this Ionic calculator. So I did a version of Ionic. I didn't put a lot of time and energy into it, to tell you the truth, but I just wanted to prove it out and get it ready for at least a prototype. And you don't want to see my build.json file. What you want to see is perhaps, I'll just give you a real quick overview of this. If I were smart, I would not try to do 50 things at once. Is my audio still working? My audio is still working. Okay, I'm going to make myself disappear because that seemed to confuse the issue. But I am still here. You are still here. And here we go. And this is the Ionic calculator. So there is a source file, and there are pages inside of here, and there's an HTML, and there's a Sass file, which is an awful lot like a less file, which is what I've got more familiar with, but Sass is what they use by default. That's just fine. This is CSS, and this should look somewhat familiar to you if you've done any web work in the last couple of years. And then there is an HTML file. And this might look a little bit familiar to you because this looks very similar to the AXML file, right? We have a whole bunch of buttons for the calculator. We have a C, a C, we have a 4, 5, 6, and a 1, 2, 3, and a 7, 8, 9. And all of these things have a click event over here, and that looks just like Angular 2, right? This click event goes to an onNumber click. Oops, oh, hey, no, don't do that. Whatever you're doing, don't do it. Man, I am pushing this computer to its knees. I may be asking too much. This thing may crash here soon. Well, we'll give it a shot. All right, let's do this. While we're waiting for this, I just want to show you this, and that is that, well, okay, I was in the process of showing you something, and that was how click event happens. It looks just like this. We go to onNumber click, and that happens in the Solution Explorer TypeScript file. This is not to be confused with a JavaScript file because you get types, unlike with pure JavaScript. You can say, and you get, you can say this is public, and you can say that it is of type string, and that gives you an awful lot of benefits that you wouldn't be able to get if you were just in pure JavaScript. You get, it's optional types though, keep this in mind, you don't have to use them. And I know there's a lot of JavaScript people out there that are like, I hate like compilers. I hate the way that compilers slow me down and get in my way. I just want to get stuff done, and I get that, but I have not talked to anybody who's switched over to TypeScript yet that has hated it so much that they've wanted to go back to JavaScript. Usually there's a learning curve, there's some frustration, and then they absolutely love it because it saves them time in the long run because the compiler finds bugs. So there's my little shtick about TypeScript. And I showed you some of the things which are specific to it, and this is the onNumber click method here, and yay, that is doing some things. This is setting the display, which is using data binding. It'll look similar to anyone who's done Xamarin Forms, except that this is just one-way data binding by default. We set the display here, and that updates the display there using the, what do they call that, the mustache syntax, something like that. All right, there's just a real quick overview. More importantly, I'm talking about the developer experience and why it's great in Ionic and why it's less great in Xamarin. And that is, here we go. So this is the Task Runner Explorer. If I were running from this from the command line, I would run Ionic. I would do Node. I would make sure I have Node installed and npm installed, and I would probably change this project and do an npm install, and then I would do, and then you'd have to do a Ionic npm install -g, so globally install Ionic and Cordova. That's how to sort of get started, and then you can do Ionic space serve, which is what I'm about to do. So what this is doing is, and this is why the developer experience is so wonderful in my experience and in Ionic, and that is because I am starting up a web browser right now, and this web browser is going to look like a mobile device, and it is going to give you the ability to go into Chrome tools and to, oh man, well, this would just be better if my machine's slowing down so badly. I'm just going to make myself disappear, but I can still talk, and I can tell you that the Chrome Web Tools is a wonderful way to work, because you can right click and go onto an individual, you can go into the DOM, you can dig into the DOM, and you can, oh, there we go, dev server running, localhost. You go into the DOM, you can dig into it, you can change elements in Chrome, you can put in JavaScript debugging syntax and stuff like that, and that is just wonderful. Oh, here we go. Oh, this looks terrible, but wait for it. Oh my gosh, this might have been part of my problem. Go away, 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 and whew. Now, if I turn on Dev Tools, I just hit F12. I just hit F12, and I can simulate an iPhone 6, or I can simulate a Nexus 5X. You'll notice those really do look like the actual device, and if I hit numbers, then it is actually doing stuff, but it's not nearly close to what a real calculator should do. That's beside the point. We're just kind of proving the point here, and I think, like I was saying to you, you can go in here and you can inspect element, and you can do things like, I would like my style equals background color : red, something like that, and there, you've actually changed that, and that is part of what is a wonderful developer experience, in my opinion, because you just go in and fiddle with stuff. You can go and fiddle with it, you can make it wonderful, and then furthermore, you got these amazingly fast read draw speeds. So imagine I liked this. I thought this was a great user interface. I want all my buttons to be red. What I can do is I can go in here to my SAS file, zip, zip, and here, and I think I have a calc button class, and I can say background dash color : red, and I can save this, and wait for that, building. I didn't actually have to, boom, wow, how cool is that? All right, I got changes to come back into my UI and see that within seconds. And that really is the kind of thing that makes me very happy. Furthermore, you can take this even a step further by getting this in an actual emulator. If you do a regular deploy into an Android emulator, it's still a little bit slow. Obviously, compiling an APK takes a little while, but once you get it into your device, you can do a -- live reload, I believe, and I'm not going to show it to you now because I'm going to go switch over to Xamarin, but you can do -- live reload, and every time you make a change to the JavaScript and CSS, you get that same reloading experience, and that is wonderful. That is an amazing experience. So let's compare this with Xamarin Classic. In the Xamarin Classic world, as you've been seeing over the course of the past 8 episodes, we have, and I'm just going to do a really quick review here, we have ourselves in the Android world. Remember, you got, instead of on Ionic where you just had one UI, there was HTML and CSS, in Classic Xamarin you have 2 completely separate UIs. One of those is in Resources, Layout, and I think it's a standard fragment. No, if it's already open, that's cool. So we've got a linear layout, with a text view and a display. I don't think that's what I wanted. Maybe I wanted a drawer list item. No, maybe I wanted a main. Oh, here we go. Yes, main. And here are all of my buttons. And you'll see that this actually looks a little bit, if you squint at it, if you squint at it just right, it looks a little bit like our HTML file did over here, because a linear layout looks a little bit like a Ion grid with rows, and those rows are the same things as these linear layouts. Yeah, maybe, maybe not. If you buy that, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, you do get the benefit in the Xamarin world of going to a previewer, which for some reason is not showing up. But okay, so you've gotten a sense of this anyway. Oh, let's just deploy it, and I want to show you we are compiling. We are compiling. We're still compiling. This compile is going to take so long that if my computer doesn't crash in the process, I'm going to have to tell you a joke. Did you know that there are 10 different types of developers in the world? Those that know binary and those that don't? Yeah, there, yeah, see, now you've done it. You're going to make me tell some more bad jokes. Did you know that there are 4 of the, gosh, this is taking a long time. 4 of the hardest problems in computer science. The 4 hardest problems in computer science are 1, cache invalidation, 2, naming things, and 3, off by 1 errors. Ooh, that's a tough crowd. Tough crowd, no laughing. But in case, I'm sure there's some of you that are still like, wait a minute, where's the 4th? What is the 4th? Man, this is slow. We can at least watch it go here. There we go. There we go. We're getting there. And maybe you're getting a sense of some of my frustration, at least with respect to the Xamarin developer experience. This is slow. I may have to tell you another joke. No, I don't. I'm going to spare you a 3rd joke, because as we speak, oh man, there we go. 8 plus 3 equals 11. So there you are. Now I should just point out, I just want to point out one more thing about these. Well, no, I'm going to save that. I'm going to save this for a different bullet point. So, but I will just show you that I put this in here, and this wasn't in the previous, this was not in the previous version of this slide that I did in episode 8, but there is a slide out menu, and I just wanted to show that to you because that is a new thing which is in here. And you can slide it in, slide it out. Okay, there we go. Now, this isn't fair. This is not fair enough because I have not actually shown Xamarin Forms, and those of you that are in my regular watcher group will not be as familiar with Xamarin Forms. So let's open up a mobilecalc.forms. And man, I'm going to have to just close up Visual Studio after I get through with this, because my machine the video is just stuttering terribly. That frame rate is bad. But this is what it looks like to do a calculator roughly in Xamarin Forms. You can see that there is scroll view. This is what XAML looks like, and inside of there is a stack layout. And that stack layout, again, looks a little bit like this if you squint. And there's a label inside of there, and there's another stack layout that's orientation horizontal. And the clicking of things, this way uses two-way data binding, so that's new. The ability to do two-way data binding happens like here. We say our command, which is sort of like the thing you do on click, is data bound into this on number click command, which is in the about view model. On number click is a command, and the thing that we do is here, and there is also data binding over here. The text of this display, which I got to show you this too. So okay, this is roughly what it's going to look like. Wow, I look really weird from the side. Man, I don't know if you guys are getting as bad a frame rate as I am, but I think it's probably just worth dropping that again. Okay. Over here we have a view, and this is going to be a previewer. So this makes Xamarin Forms better, ostensibly. And that is, you can go to over here to the Xamarin Forms previewer. Now, when this was announced at Xamarin Evolve 2 years ago, oh, it's popping up off screen. When this was announced about 2 years ago, it sounded amazing. Everyone was so excited about it because it was going to make life considerably easier when you write XAML, being able to see the results and not having to wait for that like minute to minute and 20 seconds that you normally have to wait when you're deploying it onto an iOS or an Android device. My biggest problem with it is it sounds great in theory, but in reality, this thing breaks down really fast. It looks good for a demo. It looks good, but I mean, this isn't a lot of code. Like, this shouldn't have crashed this early, and it just frequently doesn't work. So I'm not wildly impressed with this story. It sounds really good, I think, in theory, but it just breaks down. Okay, so that would have been cool if that had worked. I'm going to push my computer to its knees one more time, and I just want to show this to you so that you believe me that it's a real app, because I know you guys are a skeptical audience. And I think I've shown you enough code for today. I'm going to, once this thing launches, I am going to switch back over to slides. In fact, maybe I will switch back over to slides right now. We'll just keep an eye on this. From a UI perspective, take a look at these two screenshots over here. These were ones that I just showed you earlier, actually, and let's do a little experiment. What are the differences? Let's take a look at these for just a second. You can pause your presentation if you're not watching live, and just tell me what the differences are. Now you get to hear me sing. The differences, obviously, there is this little icon over here. There's no icon over here. There is this goes all the way to the edge over here, and here it only goes over here, and here this goes a different distance over to the right. There's different shadows. The buttons over here, the buttons are different colors, and the fonts are different sizes, roughly like that. Also, there's an indentation over here. This gets indented over here, and this doesn't. So my question, oops, nope, not that one, not reticulating splines, not now. My question to you is, which one do you like better? And I did this in front of a live audience, and I had everyone hold up their hands. I said, do you like the one on the left better? And a couple people raised their hand. And then I said, do you like the one on the right better? And a couple people raised their hand. And then I said, okay, now if you really just don't care, raise your hand. And the vast majority of people raised their hand. And I said, Ionic is for you. If you just raised your hand because you don't care about the differences, Ionic is great for you. But here's the thing. On my project, we had a designer, and that designer cared. That designer cared a lot. In fact, it was a little bit more subtle. It was a little bit more obvious than this in this case, because on Ionic 1, instead of this left nav appearing over top the way it does here, this is the Ionic 1 on the right, instead of it appearing over on the right, it pushed the whole thing over, and that drove him crazy because it didn't match material design. And I forgot to turn off my presentation. So the difference is that this one on the left is actually matching the material design. That is, it may not look as pretty to you, but it is important to note that that is, the one on the left is the more authentic experience. That's something more consistent with what someone would expect that's used to Android devices. And some designers, if you've got a designer on your team, that's going to matter to them. Okay, maybe I've said enough, but let's take a look at this secondary example. This is what happens when you build a tabs-based app out of the box with Ionic and with Xamarin. And I think this really highlights the difference. So let's take a look at this. Over here we have in Ionic, the two left-hand ones are Ionic. Oh man, I reversed my conventions. I was trying to keep Xamarin on the left. Man, that's going to drive me crazy now. All right. On the left over here, we have the Xamarin Forms experience. And notice that with one UI, now this is just some XML that looks identical, it gets rendered completely differently on Android and iOS. So these tabs on iOS get rendered down at the bottom, and on Android they get rendered up at the top. And look how differently they get rendered. They're full screen, and this is much more consistent on Android with the experience that you would expect to get, because Android users expect their tabs to be on the top. Now, with the latest release of Android, they did provide a new tabs on the bottom experience, but that's still not the default experience that people are expecting when they're working on Android. And similarly, when you're on iOS, you do expect the tabs to be on the bottom, and you expect them to look like this. So Xamarin Forms really gives you each device gives you a very unique per device experience. Now, compare that with Ionic. On the Ionic side, you're getting the tabs on the bottom regardless of which platform you're on. And yes, they're styled differently, and yes, they look a little bit different on each platform, but in general, you are not getting an authentic experience on each device. And if that matters to you, then Xamarin is a clear winner. Okay, Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Classic. I've shown them both to you. All right, let's move on. Maintainability. I guess I give Xamarin a slight edge here. I'm running short on time, so I normally have a demo that I was going to get in to you. Although, should I show you? I think this did finally launch over here, and this was the tabs experience that you see on Android. And I just hid the calculator in here, and oh, that's not working. That's beside the point. Well, you know why it's not working? Because a breakpoint just got hit. Oh, which feeds right into me talking about the developer experience. So, sort of. The maintainability story. All right, whatever. So, sometimes it's just like if I make that disappear and then bring it back, it's a little bit better. Yeah, that works. Okay. Looks like I haven't dropped too many packets. So, a compiler really is a wonderful safety net. It is a wonderful set of unit tests that you get for free. And that story is true in TypeScript. It has a compiler, and it really makes a big difference. I would just give Visual Studio and I would give C# and Xamarin a slight edge here, because in general, I always felt so much more comfortable, even on my Ionic project, having done them back to back, I always felt more comfortable going in and renaming a global variable or renaming a method, whatever it is, that change that might potentially break a whole bunch of stuff. I had nearly 100% confidence doing those refactorings in Visual Studio with ReSharper that I wasn't going to break anything. And so Xamarin gives an edge there. I just want to give a shout out real quick to, this is kind of white on white, it's not great, but ncrunch is the best tool ever, and just to show you very briefly, I already closed it. But those of you that watch my show regularly know that the mobile calc, that there's a unit test runner which is constantly running the unit tests, and it shows you on a line-by-line basis right in the IDE what the status of the coverage is. You get a green dot if it passed, and you get a red dot if it doesn't. Visual Studio Enterprise offers this if you've got a spare $2,000 or whatever sitting around, but ncrunch is a great product for only like 100 and change. Wallaby is the alternative for if you're working in the Ionic world. So I just had to give a shout out to that really awesome tool. Wallaby gives you the same experience as ncrunch, and so it's only a slight edge. Okay, let's talk about performance, because this is getting close to the end. This was actually originally an hour and 15-minute presentation, so I'm on schedule for that, but I'm not for the Xamarin Code hour. Oh my gosh, hour. Oh. All right, I'm just going to disappear for a bit again until my machine speeds back up. All right, let's talk about app performance. There's this guy, Harry Chung, and I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, and I feel really bad if I am, but he was one of the original founders of Google, or at least one of the original engineers on Google, and he helped build out their infrastructure in like 99, 2000 or whatever. And he is also into race car driving, if that gives you any kind of sense of his personality. And he is also apparently a frozen waffle master. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but so this guy got really excited about race car driving, and he wanted to build an app, and he wanted to make sure that he chose the best, fastest framework, fastest framework for doing what he wanted to do. And he didn't want to have to build it twice for iOS and Android, so he was looking into cross-platform mobile solutions, and he did a comparison of like all of the current cross-platform mobile solutions. I'll just cut to the chase here. This is a quote from his article. He said, "Xamarin crushes my benchmark. At over 30% quicker than Objective-C, I find it hard not to use, or find it hard to find a reason not to use it." Okay, so that is a pretty compelling story. Wait a minute, did he just say faster than Objective-C? That was what his findings were. Swift is the fastest way to build iOS applications, but for his findings, Xamarin was actually faster than Objective-C. So that is why it is up here, extremely fast, and Objective-C is down here. Now we're talking about small differences, but what he was doing, was he was retrieving a whole bunch of GPS coordinates from his race car driving, and I guess he was trying to use his mobile phone like, you know, a supercomputer, and he was trying to do a whole bunch of math on there to maybe find your speed, your average speed per lap, or your average speed per inch, or I don't, you know, maybe ideal path. It would have been better if I'd gone a couple inches to the left. He was doing a lot. He was doing a lot of math, and so this is reflecting, this performance benchmark is reflecting that. I just wanted to make one more call out, and that is, look at this jump. This jump right over here, which is similar to this jump over here. You go almost twice to 3 times, although typically you're going to be in the native operating system. You go almost twice as slow if you are running in a browser. So Ionic, we know, runs in a browser. So Ionic isn't specifically here, but it's going to be at this line over here. Here's a quiz for you. If you were paying attention, where will React Native run? The answer is React Native is going to run, ding, 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 over here. If that's what you said, then you win the prize. And if that's not what you said, then you get... Had to throw that in there somewhere. Okay. So React Native actually runs over here because the code part of it is in JavaScript. Even though the UI is compiled down to native, it is still running JavaScript for all of the shared code. So that's why React Native is over here, Xamarin's over here. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, wow, this is a clear winner. Well, I guess I should mention one more thing. If you don't find this data compelling, there is another random guy on the internet who says something similar, that Xamarin loaded 25% faster than hybrid apps, which means basically Ionic. It loaded larger data sets 62% faster, less memory, less CPU, and it performed faster for CPU intensive tasks. But I have to question this statistic. I have to question the 22 times faster, because that doesn't really match up with the data that we just saw from a Google engineer. Whatever. Take it or leave it. Oh, yeah. Also, the person who said that was employed by Xamarin, so maybe not. Anyway, point is, you are going to be significantly faster if you're working on Xamarin. Does that matter to you? Well, I did some interviews of some fellow developers that work at Xamarin, and they said, and I said to them, did you notice any performance issues when you did? And they had just done Xamarin and Ionic, same as me, 2 years ago, but just recently. And by the way, I updated all these slides with data from them. But I asked them, did you notice any performance differences on Ionic when you moved to Ionic from a Xamarin project? And they said zero. They did not see any performance problems. Why do you think that is? Probably because they were largely doing forms over data. They had a database and an API, and they were calling into the APIs and the database and retrieving data, and they were probably doing a Xamarin Forms typical app where they weren't processing race car data. I probably should have asked them that, but I did, and that's largely what they said was in general they were not processing race car telemetry data. So if you are in the situation where you're writing an enterprise type app, or it's just not doing a lot of performance, then ignore this category. But if you are, Xamarin gets a big win here in my book. Okay, gotta talk about this. Code Push, so cool. Code Push is a technology that was released by Microsoft. It is technically up here, way up there. It was technically in preview, but there's a lot of people who are using it in production already. This is a technology which allows you to take your either React Native or Ionic application, and you take the assets from it, the JavaScript and the images and the CSS, and you can ship it up to Code Push, and then when your users log in their app, they can pull that down directly from Code Push. What is the benefit, you ask? The benefit is that you get to completely bypass the app stores. You get to bypass the iOS and bypass the Android app stores, and you get to update your application immediately. Why does that matter? That matters because in the iOS app store, in the iTunes Connect, when you publish through iTunes Connect, there is between a day to usually 2 days, sometimes up to a week, from the time that you publish your app to the time that it gets accepted and is able to be pushed down. And that delay can kill you. That delay can mean that you pushed out a bug and it's affecting a whole bunch of your users, and they're completely out of luck. And now you've got to wait another 2 days before you can update to them. Now, I will say that both iOS and Android, over the course of the last year, I believe, have released a new feature, which is, I forget what it's called, it's gradual deploys. And so you can just deploy to 10% of your audience and have that expand out over time. And that's a cool feature. And that mitigates a lot of this fear of maybe breaking all of your users. But even better than that, what if you could just bypass the whole thing? Now, skeptical? You should be, for two reasons. At least I was skeptical for two main reasons. One is wait a minute, does Apple really allow this? Seriously? The answer is yes. If you read their fine print, which Microsoft has done, it says that you are allowed to deploy updates to your application outside the App Store as long as you don't do substantial changes and basically, swap a game for a, productivity app or something like that. You can't make substantial changes to what your app is and does, and if you do that, you're breaking their policy. But if you're just deploying updates, you're totally allowed to do it. And so this technology, if you're using Ionic or React Native is totally allowed by Apple, and of course by Android, because they allow everything. All right, so if you are like me, you're skeptical for a second reason, and that is, what about security? And they have taken that very seriously. They have a whole set of code signing capabilities, and it's obviously all SSL, and I don't know. If I were using this technology, I would still be a little bit careful, because yeah, I might want to test out the security aspects of it anyway. All right, that is code push. We're winding down. A couple etc. points that might be worth considering. One is the longevity. Will this framework be here in 3 years? This is a question you might want to ask yourself. I have no idea what the answer to this is, but I will say this: Xamarin, backed by Microsoft. Now, you might say, so was Windows Phone. So was Silverlight, right? But I think my personal feeling is that Xamarin is a core feature to them, and that they are not going to abandon that, because that enables the ability to push out to mobile apps. I just don't see it going anywhere. But I've been wrong before. Anyway, React Native, backed by Facebook, going anywhere? Probably not. How about Ionic? That's backed by DriftyCo. Who is DriftyCo? I don't really know, but they make some money doing push notifications and stuff like that. So as long as they continue to make money, I guess they'll be around, right? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. Just something to be worth considering. I asked the developers that had worked on their Ionic project recently what tooling, if they had any recommendations for anyone starting a project. They said, hey, make sure you use TS-lint, and make sure you use editor config for static analysis and code styling. That makes everybody on the team use the similar features. Basically, it's the same thing as the ReSharper gets you. And, as we all know, if you're not reusing ReSharper, you're probably not doing it right. Okay, interrupt. last Etsy point, and that is, I unfortunately don't have a lot of experience with doing Ionic native, but that is what the technology is called. If you are needing to interrupt with third-party libraries, then you need to use the thing called Ionic native, which sounds like React Native, but it's not. Ionic native is how you interrupt with third-party libraries natively. I will say that I have done quite a bit of Xamarin native linking. It's super easy if you're doing it on Android and in Java, because the languages are like, Java's a superset, a subset of C#, obviously. And if you are doing iOS, it can be a little bit harder. It can be kind of time consuming. I can't even imagine how hard it would be in Ionic to try and get that into JavaScript, but in any event, I just wanted to say that interrupt is your backup plan, and it's worth taking into consideration. And it is there's a pretty good story on there for Xamarin. Okay. Oh yes. So I don't know. I get a little bit frustrated with Xamarin sometimes because things break. You're not close to the metal like if you were working on native. You're higher up off the stack. I asked these developers this question. I said, sometimes I get frustrated with Xamarin for having bugs. How about you? And they said, oh yeah, we did too, but we had more frustrations with Ionic than we did with Xamarin, with bugginess, general bugginess. And in particular, they had problems with the way that how there's an info P list in iOS, and there's a manifest XML file in Android. Well, there's a generic in Ionic world. There's a generic abstraction over both of those, and it gets compiled down into those two things when you compile, when you do a deploy step. And they had problems where they had a lot of issues with those files being generated and being different for each developer's machine. And they often just find they had to blow their entire environment away, re-download from source control, and rebuild the whole thing, which I can see that being frustrating. I don't know, something to keep in mind. So I want to summarize this. I want to finish this up, and I will actually finish this in time for an hour and 15 minutes. So I'll make myself disappear. And just a sort of a high level, I feel like whenever I evaluate a framework, I think of it in terms of how close to the metal am I, or how high up the stack am I. And I think of Ionic as being much higher up the stack. I used to do SharePoint Developer. I don't know if there's anyone here in the audience that has done SharePoint development, but I think a lot of developers would get frustrated with SharePoint development because they were so high up on the stack. It gives you so much power, it gives you so much capability, but it takes a lot away too, because when things go wrong, you're often struggling with the framework. And sometimes I felt like that's the case with Ionic. Like when that designer came in and said, hey, we need this to look like this, it was like we were fighting our framework in order to get what is essentially a native user experience for the users, and fighting your framework is never a good thing. So that is oops, here we are. That is where we are. I think the lower you are on the stack, closer classic Xamarin Forms, and then further away from that would be React Native and Ionic. The less control you have, and the further down, the more control you have. Keep in mind that there is potentially a huge benefit here from not having to write a separate web application. So that may be a huge selling point for you. Conversely, Ionic, the developer experience is so much better, so much faster. It's so much more enjoyable to work on that. When I asked those developers that whether they would start a new project, whether they would choose Xamarin or Ionic just apart from everything else, they said Ionic hands down, because they could get to market so much faster, the developer experience was so much better, they could just get stuff churned out. And for them, making it look beautiful wasn't perhaps as important because they didn't have a designer on their project. So that's why I think there's a lot of competing demands, but I think this chart here kind of summarizes where my feelings are on the matter in terms of where you want to be. Okay. So I am now finishing up. Oof. Done it. There we go. All right. Well, thank you for bearing with me for what has been a little bit more than a code hour. We have had a code hour and 15 minutes. So thanks for joining me. If you have enjoyed this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It helps me out. If I get enough subscribers, I can eventually change my channel name, which I am not a big fan of. It's youtube.com/c/Lee Richardson 200. I'd like to think that'd be like El Pritchard or something. Anyway, these slides are available on prezi.com/view/, and I hope to see you again next week. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful week.